We all know this feeling from a long time ago. Sometimes how it catches us and then refuses to go. Maybe we then pick up a pen and start to write about it. But what does it mean to write from memory? What happens when we do that? And how do we write from memory? These are some of the questions we revolve around in this episode. And joining this conversation is Niranjan Kunwar, an educationist whose career includes teaching in primary schools and mentoring teachers in Nepal. His memoir, Between Queens and the Cities, was published in 2020. Mijok Strip, a chapter book, and the English translation of Seto Dharti are two of his forthcoming works. Thank you for tuning in to How'd You Create That? The podcast is supported by the Open Institute for Social Science. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. And we are now also on Substack with curated writings from the podcast on creativity and the creative life. I'm your host, Alfa. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. It's a lovely Sunday, as you were saying, after a big rain on Saturday yesterday. So yeah, the weather is really good. So I think it's a great time to be having this conversation. So your book, Between Queens and the Cities, came out in 2020. And it's been over 4 years. And perhaps even longer because, books take longer time to write and edit and all of that. I'm curious to know, what did you think when it came out then and now after all these years? You might have new perspectives and insights. How do you feel about it?
Well, there are different ways of responding to that. Like, how do I feel about the fact that the book is in the world, or the fact, or my relationship with the book now, or, all of that, right? The different ways of responding to that. I'm certainly very happy still that the book is out there. And as I was talking to you earlier, it's also curious, especially this year, because as you said, it's actually almost been 5 years.
5 years. I said 4.
20,
correction.
No, actually 4 years.
4 years?
4 years and more, slightly more.
Slightly
right?
more.
And the fact that you wanted to talk about the book 4 years later is also, I was asking you, why, or is it, still relevant? Maybe let's talk about new work. And then I was also recently invited to Brahmaputra Lit Fest. So it's curious that the book is suddenly again, up in the consciousness. Part of it could be, it might still be unique in the sense that because it's a queer memoir and there still hasn't been others, right? So in that sense, I think
that's true.
It's unique in that sense. But my relationship with the book has definitely changed a lot. Releasing the book, especially also just as COVID was peaking. And there's a lot of issues with the timing that when I think about it now, I almost feel like I was very lucky that I got it to the publisher right before COVID. They managed to get it out, and you know what I mean? So I feel like I'm also answering in I don't know.
That's
not directly.
No, it's okay.
All I'll say is, we all change, evolve, but for me, absolutely. It came at a time when I had moved back at home to live with my parents because of COVID, and then the book came out. So for us, they were all these forces aligning. As a result, it was very transformative for me, actually. So I really feel it was this, it was almost this spiritual task that I released in the world. And I have actually felt very deeply psychologically relieved in a way. And as a result, much lighter, and the way I move through the world is different, certainly, as a result of the book.
Wow. A lot is about timing, isn't
Yes.
it? I was curious about your memoir in particular because a couple of my friends and even myself, we've been exploring this idea of writing from memory and what it means. And
it seems like there might be a perspective like who can write a memoir. Either you have to be very successful, that your story, everybody wants to read it, or it has to be extraordinary to stand out. But those are not just the memoirs that are there out in the world. So that's one of the reasons why I was really curious to speak with you in particular, like start off our conversation with memoir about what you think, is a memoir, and, how should we approach it in that way?
So yeah, thank you for asking that. So I think in a way it's not surprising you as a Nepali person asking that, because in our literary canon there might be fewer memoirs, right? So it's a very cultural thing where, so that's one part. So as opposed to, let's say, Western tradition, and especially in the US being more of an, like independent culture, like capitalism, like focusing on the self. So there's the tradition of nonfiction writing and writing memoirs is very robust in the US and the West in general. So I just wonder, maybe it's like a bigger cultural thing. In the East, people don't write as much memoir because it's more of a communal thing. Right?
Yeah, that could be true.
So there's that. The other distinction I want to point out is the difference between memoirs versus autobiographies versus biographies, right? And it's important not to confuse that. So memoir is a very specific literary genre. In what I've noticed in Nepal especially is there's a big tradition of writing autobiographies or biographies. And usually those are about people who are very famous or cultural icons, right?
Yeah.
So that's across the world, like very famous people, either they write themselves or they assign somebody else to write. And there's another tradition where here, like even people who are not at all writers or in the arts, bureaucrats, leaders, after they retire, it becomes a retirement project. They write about their life or they ask somebody to write about their life. That's, in my opinion, definitely is not memoir or even autobiography. I would even question whether it could be considered literary in some ways, right? So it's like, so there's that. And unsurprisingly, like when my book came out or when I was working on it, there were a lot of queries from different people saying, like almost a couple of them were very direct, saying like, why are you writing about yourself? Like, how, like, what's special about you? Or like, how come you are famous? Like, so they almost dismissed it. Especially also, as I said, because like I was not like in mid-career, like I'm not even retirement age. Like if I had told them I'm writing about my life at the age of 70, then people would understand. So there's the slight almost, whether it's a cultural thing or maybe because it's not as prevalent. So there's that. But so again, so the distinction between memoirs, biography, autobiography is, as you are inferring, memoir in my mind is not a life story. It's not, you don't have to be famous or have to do something. It's about either a specific event, a specific time in your life, or a specific concept, right? So there might be memoirs. Let's say people might write memoirs about how I overcame my heroin addiction. So in my 20s. So let's say if somebody in their 30s might write only about 6 years in their life where they went to rehab. So it's a very specific time, specific project, and it conveys a specific message, right? So it's not about fame or success or anything. So then memoir becomes literary, is about, as you were saying, memoirs about my time in China, for example, right? So like it's like this, but then the literary craft is like how to make that interesting to others and how to make that literary is itself the project. In my case, I was very clear and confident that it's important and I also want to write it, is because like no other Nepalis had written about being gay in Nepal, right? So to me that was relevant and also important, so that's what
that's how it began for you. Can we call memoirs like an extended personal essay? For example, like my interest in memoirs also began, like you had mentioned, like I was writing about my time in China and I was just like documenting it because it's been so many years. And it's, I don't know what's going to happen to it, but it's like in form of essays right now. So can we call memoirs like extended essays or
So
something?
rather than can we call this, I think it depends on different projects. There's definitely a relation. So the big the literary genres are, if we think about fiction, non-fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, all of that, right? So but I think both personal essays, memoirs fall within non-fiction. And also non-fiction also has branches, right? Whether it's history, whether it's an essay, whether it's an analysis review. So I think depending on the length and type. So for example, even like when you open Kantipur, or that's also like a non-fiction essay in a way, right?
Yeah.
So how is that different from like somebody's memoir, etc.? So it could be, if you say personal narrative, there's a personal aspect to it, right? So then it also depends on which voice are you using, first person, second person, third person, right? So there's all these different nuances to it. Some memoirs are extended personal narratives, some may not be, so, and it's not as important, I think.
Like it's like there's a lot of overlap that might happen, and there's no one box like, oh, this is
but
this.
Then I would
that.
think some of my personal essays have entered this book, right? So or somebody might be, a whole book might be inspired based on one personal essay, for example, so
yeah, indeed. And that brings me to another curiosity of mine, which is, again, something I was talking with my friends and at the Open Institute. We are at the Open Institute right now too, recording. And a friend of mine had asked this question about remembering things from the past. For example, if somebody's writing a memoir and, like even in your memoir, there are dialogues, there are specific details. And how do we like remember them, or how do we access them other than like keeping a journal when something is happening at that particular time? Like, was there a way for you to access your memory that was a bit in the past?
So it's actually, in my mind, it's a simpler response where, yes, I think journaling is the best way, right? And that's the most, in a way, accurate too. Like it's almost like evidence, right? So you have that. And these days, emails, even looking back at photos, and all of that, right? So you want to be as true as possible. In my case, there were 2 or 3 very clear things happening. So the first part of the book was actually, I wrote it in 2012. So when I decided to leave the US, it was then that I was like, I have to write about this and I might forget. This is the time. So let me capture all of this. So I literally was like documenting, at that time. So that at that time it was much fresher. And that section actually, I did not really work with it for almost 5 years. And even there was a gap of 2-3 years when I came to Nepal and all of that, when I wasn't writing, but I was writing other things. I was writing other personal narratives, art reviews, this and that, which I didn't think was part of my memoir, because then my story was in a way not complete. And what's going to happen to the first part? So then after 2017-18, and especially towards the end, as I was structuring the book, then I realized that, the essay I wrote for Lalit, or that Kathmandu Post article, that kind of fits, so I could rework with it, right? So then it was also about capturing the moment. It was already there, right? So then to me, writing became actually just putting things together and rewriting, which is actually for like a student or a teacher of writing, it's very interesting. And I'm sure it's come up where what exactly is writing. Sometimes writing is just arranging things, or being clear in your mind, or you're finding your voice, So it's, so I did a lot of that work. So it's partly remembering, partly, like things you've already documented, and on these days, visuals, like you might have messages in your phone. I have like a whole Instagram archive now from 10 years ago that I could revisit to write about, so.
What if somebody's writing a personal narrative or writing about their memory, and they don't have a lot of documentation. Like maybe there are pictures, maybe there are not. In that case, there might have been times like even when you were writing your own memoirs and essays, like not everything was documented. So how do you reach to that part of memory which might not be documented, like might not have like clear pictures, or maybe there is no a mention of it in like physical evidence or something like that?
So that's when I think the skills of writing kind of comes into play, right? So if you're writing a personal narrative, then you want to convey truth. So you are essentially asking what is true at this moment, right? So when you're writing, you want to write in a way where it seems true to you at this moment.
At this moment. Yeah.
And
that
then
makes
you're
sense.
like, so what's important, right? So is the color of the sweater important, or what you thought about the sweater now is important? So then when you write, you want to convey first what's the important details and what seems true to you. But don't say it was a blue sweater if you are not sure, you know. You just say a fluffy sweater. So then no one can come and say, but that was blue, you know.
Yeah.
So you also want to fact check as much as possible. But then also it's a whole about important details versus unimportant, which in a basic writing skill, that's something you really want to pay attention to, also to grab your reader's attention, all of that. There are other things into play where what's important and why you're writing this, you know.
So at that very moment, what you think is more important and what you think was at that very moment when you were writing. So it might not be what you were thinking 5 years ago of that particular event, but right the moment you're writing, that's what's come. So that is what is true for that time.
Yes, and I'll give you an example because it's like very vivid in my mind. I think what you're also getting at is, but the nature of nonfiction writing and memory is in the details, right? Because like some of the basic initial courses, you know, capture the details, sight, sounds, color, as much as possible. The
six senses,
right?
as we say.
But then the irony is that, but then 10 years ago, I don't know, right? So then again, to illustrate my point, what I'll say is, I might, and it's actually, I'm also thinking about that part is like, let's say, in 2018, if I was writing about 2008, what I might begin is that, like it's 2018 in Kathmandu on a very gloomy spring day. As I look at Thadodunga, the sky is gray, and I'm thinking about my time 10 years ago. So do you see what I say? So the vivid details I bring to the present to capture the reader, but what I'm writing about 10 years ago, the details I may not have, but then the truth I have, how I feel about that, right? So then it's about combining all of those things and balancing the craft. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we can still bring the five senses. I was saying six senses earlier.
Yeah, so you can still, that's still very important to be in the moment, to make it crisp and vivid, you know, for the reader. So there's a way to do that.
Yeah. And if there are like pictures or videos, then it's easier. You can like fact check and you can say, oh, that was a blue sweater, blue fluffy sweater, maybe. Yeah, true. There's also some vulnerability that comes with writing nonfiction and memoirs. You know, you're writing about your life. You're also and it's very likely that there are people, you know, that show up in your, you know, they also show up in the book, and they also probably show up in other places and essays and stuff. How would you like balance that, or how would you suggest somebody who's working or would like to work in that area balance it out?
So first, speaking of vulnerability, which is super important, right? In general, artists, creative people, and I think all of us, we need to practice being vulnerable and in the world, right? Rather than being closed off. And the more we try to open up and share, then others will also see it. And that's how connections happen, you know. All of that. So, but I've always sort of tried to move towards that. And to be vulnerable, you need to be brave as well, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And you also need to take risks as an artist, as a writer. And that's true for everyone, right? So if you think of it in terms of risk taking, practicing vulnerability, trying to be brave with good intentions, not to, or not to blame anyone or all of that. I mean, that might also happen in many memoirs. I mean, what I tried to do was, it was my story. I was very clear, and as much as possible, not to point fingers at anyone, but just speaking from my perspective.
Yeah.
And some of my relatives, etc., that I've talked to, they also actually reassured me, saying, no, the way we read it was, it's your story. So in that sense, things are fine. But there are examples of many memoirs, especially very fraught personal memoirs, that it might actually be about, whether, let's say, if it's divorces, this, that, it's about blaming somebody else. And that gets quite messy, right? But then there's also this other angle about the ethics. So as soon as you're writing about somebody, is it okay or not? You're writing about somebody's life. I mean, in my case, I would say, like, I actually did not ask everyone's permission. I didn't talk to everyone. And people might still say that's not right or slightly unethical. But in my defense, I'll just say that as much as possible, I try to, again, not wash my dirty laundry or point fingers, but I brought in people as they passed through my life, and as much as possible, trying to focus on how they brought positivity or made me learn, you know what I mean? But yeah, ethics is something you have to also pay attention to, and you just, as long as you make peace with it, right? And you're clear about what's happening.
Yeah. So the intention is very important. And like you said, you were telling your story. So that was the main intention. And like you, as you beautifully put, like other characters were just passing through your life, and that's how you tried to portray them. That's a wonderful way of looking at it. Yeah, because I think when we write about people who are around us, even like friends, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit murky, like where do you draw the line, or like, will they get mad at you for writing about it? Stuff like that sometimes comes up. What is it about writing that you so like? There's so many other art forms that you could have embraced, but you moved to writing. And you also mentioned in the book, quote, in 1999, I did not know that I would eventually start writing. You started writing, the book came out, and you're also up to other new things right now. So what is it about writing that connects you, or what do you feel about writing in general?
Well, I mean, I do think it's extremely important. I mean, as a child, I just gravitated towards that, the world of books, right? So, I mean, it's tricky to answer that, but for certain people, and I think I'm now thinking about what Roman said. He also put it really beautifully in Friday's Katha Satha event, where so writing is about sharing, and it's about connecting, right? To people who you may not normally come across in life, etc. So I think Roman was saying he was this, quote unquote, like lonely child, where he was always sitting in a corner reading instead of hanging out with people. But he didn't feel lonely. He felt connected to all these different voices, across time. Whereas these days, social media is supposed to connect us and all of that, and people are becoming lonelier, right?
Yeah.
So it's also, I do think writing really gets us to the depths of our being. Like emotionally, intellectually, and if people value that, then I think it's really important. In certain countries with specific histories, like for example in Nepal, where we know there was a long history of oppression and people didn't get to go to schools and had access. So then growing up, there wasn't, even now we don't have a robust literary culture still. I mean, maybe it's picking up, whatever. So then I also felt that just on a basic sense, writing, reading is important to whether inform people or circulate ideas or for issues of social justice. In my case, it's tied to that too, right? So So there are different goals, and also that also depends on different kinds of writing, right? So articles, non-fiction writing could be like more, for social justice issues, all of that. Like, fiction has a slightly different, it's like bringing people to creating new worlds, making people imagine things, right? For some people, they write to share, to express themselves, so depending on who you are, what kind of writing you do, it's very therapeutic, and just for your personal peace of mind too. For some people, you can use it as that, so it's a communal thing, you build community. So
Indeed. Maybe you can tell us what you're up to these days, like now that we've talked about like why writing is important for you and in general. It's been a while since the memoir came out, as we started in the beginning. So yeah, what's going on these days in terms of writing?
So when there was a phase when, let's say, when the book was in draft stage, I was also at that phase. I was also doing a lot of regular writing, publishing articles in different, I was very prolific, I think. I think of that as more practice, so as a writer, you do need to practice being a writer, and maybe that might look different for different people. I benefited a lot from working with different editors in different outlets and revising my piece, so learning the craft, which I had actually used to do more in college. And then I had also had a break when I was teaching. I didn't have time to write as regularly. And then when I returned to Kathmandu, I actually had to relearn some of that or practice, right? So then I'm giving you a slightly longer response. So then when the book came out, and again, remember it was during COVID, so the times were very different, right? People were mentally, emotionally at such different places. And for me, after the book came out, it actually also felt in different ways like I gradually stopped writing regularly because, because I actually found other interests. Maybe I was reading more, watching shows, just chilling, being with my parents, all of that. I still don't know what was happening, but I also am okay with that, as in, I just needed that break, whatever. But then there comes a time when writing is so much about practice, discipline, right? If you don't do it a lot, then you also wondering, what am I doing, etc. So after and I didn't completely stop writing. I was writing other things. I was just, the way I was writing was different. Now I have recently again sort of launched a project where I've thought about what I want to write about, what's relevant, why write, all of those questions, right? So one is because I'm interested in the arts, I've started a Substack to reflect on the arts. And that's not art review. It's not this, it's not that. It's just my, it's like a personal project in a way. And then I have another chapter book coming out, which was, I guess, one project that I worked on, meant for 10 to 12-year-olds, which I'm quite proud about too. And then the translation for Seto Dharti has been delayed. It's also supposed to come out soon. So yeah, those are some of the projects apart from the educational work I do. And yeah.
Would you like to talk a little bit about what the process was? How did the process change for you when you were writing the children's chapter book that will be out soon?
So I think especially in Nepal's context, and some of that depends again on individual writers, right? So I think also I think about the writing process actually, which I also teach across the board, from little kids to college to adults. It's helpful to think about every project as it has its own process. So, and the end of the process is publishing. And you can think of publishing as also sharing, right? So the question becomes, why write? Am I writing this to share with my best friend? Or am I writing this for my journal, for myself? Or am I writing this for Kathmandu Post audience? Or am I writing this for the next generation? You know what I mean? So what's the timeline of that process? And I would suggest that for anyone you need to complete the process. So don't say I'm writing something, I'm a writer, but then if you haven't thought of publishing, or if there are many pieces which actually hasn't been quote unquote published, then the process is not complete. So it's helpful to think about it like that. So when I was, as I said, more prolific, writing for the dailies, etc., I thought of it as like, okay, if there's like a workshop or something happening, then I want to get this out in the next 4 days. If there's an art opening, then I'll review it maybe the next month, and then your revision, all of that, talking to the publishers, you kind of have to do all of that work to finish the process and get it out. And then you start another thing, right?
Okay.
For me, I was more writing shorter pieces with a shorter timeline. And the process was also short. But then after my book came out, and these days I'm thinking more about, I don't want to necessarily do more of those short-term things, which I kind of did. Now I want to work more. Let's think about a slightly bigger project, or maybe, slightly different things. So then the book Mijok's Trip, which is a children's book, but it's longer than a picture book. So I thought, I again had to plan with the publisher, and it had its own process. I would say that took about like almost a year, 1.5 years, right? So, and it also changed a lot. So my initial idea, my first draft, it actually went through a lot of changes, which is part of the process. But I was able to do that because I knew that eventually it would get published, and there's something clear at the end. It's just about getting there, right? So, so that process was that. The thing I was surprised about was, like, I almost thought that, I think it might be more, like, it wasn't as straightforward as I thought. So as a writer, I was surprised too, that whether, what I was thinking, the initial idea to the end, even the craft, getting the words right, took some finagling, which I guess is true for every piece of writing.
Yeah. That's very interesting that you discovered something new when you were working on the children's book. You talked about the, audience. Who are you writing for? How important is it for someone to think about audience? And did you think about audience when you were also writing the memoir and other things that you also write, like your Substack, for instance?
I think just like for a writer, the process is important. And I think here I might be taking more of a writing teacher perspective than like a regular writer, whatever. So, and again, even this podcast, who is our audience, right? So, is it younger Nepalis? Is it aspiring creatives? So who am I talking to? So from that perspective, I would say slightly more forcefully is to focus on the process, but also I would say, yes, audience is very important, because that's what I learned when I was a student from my professors, right? Because again, to be clear about what genre it is, what's the ending, and who my audience is very important, because I think that kind of influences the tone and the voice. It may not be important in every piece, but if you think about that, then your writing becomes clearer. And, so yeah, for my memoir, my audience was definitely Nepali people more than the whole world, for example. Or I wasn't thinking too much about even Western audience, whatever, because I knew this was very much for Nepali people, and especially younger Nepalis, So then that's why the fact that it got published in Nepal, to me, I'm very happy about it. And I'm not so concerned that it didn't go out as much, because, it met the target audience effectively in that sense. So, and for different books, right? For Substack, my audience might be now, I'm not thinking too much about it. I'm thinking mainly for myself, but I'm also putting it out there because maybe people interested in the arts will be, so, and then I will also share it with specific people who might be more interested in the arts, but not even with some of my friends, because maybe they may not be interested in the arts, so.
How later in the draft do you think the question of audience comes for you? Like, we usually say that the first draft is something that you write, like, just put words out there, just toil through it and get everything out. And then you rewrite and edit. So how later do you think the audience came for you for the book, but also for other writings that you do? Like, do you think about it right from the start, or maybe it comes a little later on?
That could also be a personal thing. Again, I agree with you in the sense that, let's say sometimes you might want to write something, or you might think today is my writing day, and your goal is just to draft. So at that point, I would say the most important thing is just to put words on paper. Like if you manage to even write 200-300 words, that's it, right? You don't need to think about anything else.
True.
So some of that will definitely come later. But then again, depending on, are you a columnist? Do you have a deadline? All of that. Then it's better to be as clear as possible from the get-go, right? So if you have a deadline with Kathmandu Post and you're writing about something, then you know who your audience is and what tone you're going to take. But let's say if you have a bigger project and you don't necessarily know that's okay. You're just exploring, like writing as exploration. Let's see where the mind goes, So that's why with my Substack too, it's more sort of diffuse in that sense, where it's okay for me not to know the audience, but then Substack itself being a platform with its own ecosystem. So I kind of have also an audience, So anyway, so it's some of that,
Some of that. So it depends on the project. Some of them you probably have to know from the start. Some you could just like discover on the way later on. And it might just come, or it might also not come. It might just be an explorative thing.
Yeah, and sometimes if you don't know who the audience is, it's fine. Like you might find it after it's published. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Oh, has that happened to you? Like you wrote something and you found out the audience after it came out?
It happens now and then. Like it reaches. That's the beauty of art writing. Is like sometimes it reaches places you never expected. Or you hear from people you never expected, and I still get some messages, which is very nice. Regarding my book.
I see. Yeah, writing is a journey. It's like a river. You're just flowing with it, and then it goes to different places. Great. You're also an educator and you teach writing as well, and you're also a writer. So how does all of that work for you in your process of the craft, like teaching writing and also writing yourself?
I try to make it work in the sense, in my mind, it's connected, all of that. So it's helpful for me as a writer to teach writing, because it's a reminder for myself too, Or sometimes if I'm telling students, read regularly, like inevitably I think, or am I doing that in my life, So it's good to be true to your words in that sense. But I feel like creative people, writers, it's also about finding inspiration, right? So what inspires you? So I think sometimes you find inspiration in solitude, sometimes in community. Sometimes you find inspiration going to an art gallery, sometimes watching a movie, sometimes talking to a friend. So it's this ecosystem.
Yeah. It's not straightforward. There's no one path. Like there are it's like a river again, a lot of tributaries, and they just come together.
I would say that, and also emphasize at this point is, if anyone wants to be a writer, the most effective way is to be a reader first, So, and especially for younger people, I would just say read as much as possible. That's one way to be a writer, because if somebody hasn't done that, then you don't know what's out there, all of that. So
that's true.
And me being a teacher, like sometimes teaching writing is also like I reread stuff that I teach, and then I find inspiration in that, which feeds into my writing. So
yeah, it's all flowing together. It's like it's a cycle, and it's an ecosystem. Yeah, I think that's the perfect word. Should we move to rapid fire? How do you feel about the rapid fire?
You did mention it, but I actually haven't even thought about how do I feel about it or what's going to happen. But sure, like, is there a time limit?
No, there's no time limit as such. A lot of our guests end up taking a lot of time, and rapid fire is just a section to like ask questions that are different and all related to your craft and your writing practices. Before we move to rapid fire, I would just quickly like to thank our snack partner, Palsa Newari Kitchen, for, sending us snacks for this season as well. So let's move to rapid fire. I have a couple of questions to begin. Do you have a favorite time of the day to write?
Absolutely, morning. So I was actually throughout my process and even to this day, it works very well for me. And I know that people are function at different times of the day. There's been different researches, night owls versus morning people, this and that. The research also changes. But I actually believe that we're freshest in the
Mornings.
And I sort of curate my life sometimes around that, how important writing is to you, and do you want to set aside that time? I think that's also part of the discipline, everything, right? Do you have the energy, the mental clarity, the inspiration? And the more you do it, it's like habit formation, right? So if you do it continually, then for me, in fact, most things, I used to before, first thing in the morning, I would write before anything else. And after afternoon, evening, I fade, so I don't do much. But sometimes with revision, etc., it might work. But
so mornings, writing time, then evenings, maybe revisions. Great. Do you like to type or do you write longhand?
I've thought about that, but typing, that works much better for me than longhand. Even now when I journal, there's something about that I don't write as well when I journal. For me, typing means I'm writing, I'm at my best. And I find it very easy to also revise, edit, compared to word processing. But also, so many people you hear, now with phone, if you get some inspiration idea, type in your phone or voice note, I actually don't do that a lot.
Okay.
I just write from my memory mostly when I'm ready. And then I look at different notes from before, I guess.
Okay. Do you have a favorite font you use when you're typing?
I don't have one. And also, I don't have one. Sometimes when I send draft, you just use some of the more formal standard ones, either Times New Roman, Arial, etc. Right? But I also want to say that for writers to not worry about that.
But no. I was just curious.
That's not important.
If you have a font you like to type in.
So in fact, again, as a writing teacher, sometimes here, first year college students, let's say, when you give a simple writing exercise, you get responses which is very decorative, whether it's bold or bigger fonts or all of that. And that's actually in a more technical way, it's you actually have to coach them not to do that. Keep it simple, formal, because why are you doing all of that? It's sort of distractive,
I see.
And especially with job applications and also applying to different things, it doesn't look serious when you play with the font, basically.
Okay. Great. So keep it simple.
Yes, for sure.
Do you listen to music when you're writing?
When I'm writing, I don't.
Okay.
I need complete quiet and all of that. I don't. But then interestingly, in a way, during COVID, I sort of rediscovered music. My relationship has changed. It never used to be a big part of my life. I guess we have different relationships. These days, I listen to music a lot, and I'm exploring it. And I do think, whether it's the harmony, rhythm, the auditoriness of it, might actually weave back into our creative life.
Creative lives,
It's because I also again remember from my student days, writing also has rhythm, right? There's poetry in it. There's the way the words flow. So I think the more you tune in with music, rhythm, harmony, and practice that with your writing, it's helpful. I think
it's helpful. Yeah, true. Music has rhythm, and they say, you can find the rhythm of your words when you read them out loud. So writing also has that rhythm. Can you recommend us 3 artists that you're listening to? Since we're talking about music.
I'll say Miles Davis, Mahal, and Khai Khan, I think, is an Indian South Asian DJ. Kiachian.
Okay. What do you do when you are stuck? When you write? Like, let's say you hit writer's block.
So yeah, you hear the term writer's block a lot, stuck. Like I don't think about it in those terms.
Okay.
I again think about it in terms of the process, right? And my own commitment and goals. So, and we will have good days, bad days, productive days, non-productive days. So I say, am I drafting? Am I revising? Am I editing? And did I do that or not? So sometimes like you might sit and let's say if you're having a bad day, your draft might be really shitty, or you might only write 100 words as opposed to and then actually you realize that's okay for now, right? And you come back another day. So again, if you feel completely stuck and unable, then I would say you should still sit for half an hour and see what comes up. So it's about the physical practice of also sitting and having that commitment, so.
Yeah. That just reminds me of, I read a post on Instagram where it was saying that like sports and arts are very related because we see stamina and style, but if running requires, like you need a lot of energy, writing also requires endurance, like what you just mentioned, to just sit down and, you know, it's not easy. But let's give it a shot.
No, the stamina, all of that is definitely part of it for sure. So yeah, writing is also a very physical thing, is what I was saying.
Yeah.
Right? So writing doesn't mean, so it's about time setting. Where are you energetically? Do you actually sit? Is there a spot? All of that. So.
All of that, yeah, true. So my last question for rapid fire. Please recommend us 3 books that you'd like our listeners and us to read.
Something that just came to my mind is something I read recently, and I can't remember the name. Maybe you'll help me. It's like Maria Popova.
Oh, yes, Maria Popova. Figuring. Yes.
I would recommend that to anyone and everyone. Is just exquisite and incredible.
I read her, The Universe in Verse.
I haven't read that.
Yeah, that's lovely too. Yeah.
So figuring is awesome. Did you say 3? Or
no,
just
The Universe. Yeah, no, I said 3. Yes, 2 more.
I mean, for the sake of ease, I'll say Mary Oliver's poems. Nothing in particular. And I'm a big fan of Murakami. Whatever people say, to me, I'm a huge fan. Like, I've read everything about him, and I'm looking forward to read his next book.
Oh, wow. So maybe one Murakami that you would like to recommend.
So I had it in mind. Kafka on the Shore.
Kafka on the Shore.
Yes.
Okay. So Maria Popova, Mary Oliver, and Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. Great. I think this is a great time to end the conversation. And thank you so much for joining me. It was wonderful speaking with you and getting to know about your process of writing and what it means to you and some of the tips and tricks that you shared. I'm sure I will definitely be using them.
And thank you very much, Alfa. Again, I appreciate this whole project and also for inviting me as one of your several guests. And yeah, very happy to do this.
Thank you.